much for taking time out of your schedule for this interview. So without further ado, let's start. Okay, so one, how do you think national issues affect families in Connecticut?
Depends on who you are, depends on where you are. Right now, what I would say is last week I was at a rally in Norwalk, and we are seeing ICE agents come into our state and breaking down doors of courtrooms and dragging people into unmarked cars. That is a very distinct, concrete way with which the federal government is now interacting with people who live in Connecticut. And then there's policies. And a lot of our budget, we have a $56 billion biennial budget, so about $28 billion a year. And of that, about half of that money comes from the federal government. And so if they say, you have to do this, you can't do this, a lot of the choices that we have to make are not just based on the policies that we want to see, but on how much money we'll receive from the federal government. So we might be helping these people, but we might be hurting these people. And we're seeing a lot more of that. A lot more of the money that we get is basically held back unless we agree to certain terms. And so right now there's more of that sort of interaction with the federal government that is more at odds than we've ever seen before.
Okay. So you're a strong supporter of increasing the minimum wage, but as a small business owner, you're aware of the financial realities small businesses face. How do you balance paying your employees higher wages and the reality that small businesses face?
So my feeling was always that we need to create a middle class and build out a middle class. And my belief is that you don't allow the wealthy to just have more of their money to spend more. You ensure that more people that are going to spend almost all of their disposable income, just people in the middle class, the working poor, who need to spend that money just to survive, that is where government should be trying to push as much as possible. And so while I, as a small business owner, will take an economic hit in the short term by paying more in wages, I think that if we all do this, that we all benefit in the long term. I think that we have a more dynamic market, that you have a more likelihood of succeeding if you're a small business owner, because you have more customers that can buy your goods. And I think that it ultimately ends up creating more independent wealth by ensuring that people have better wages.
Yeah. So you've already declared your campaign for governor while Governor Lamar is still in office. Do you see yourself challenging him directly in a primary, or are you thinking about a different approach to the nomination?
This is specifically a challenge to the governor. That is why I am running. If I weren't to run, the Lieutenant Governor, Susan Beisowitz, has been getting commitments for the past 5-6 years. Attorney General Tong has also expressed across the state that he's interested in this role. Luke Broden, the previous mayor of Hartford, who's now running for the 1st Congressional District, he was running for this position, and Sean Scanlon right now is likely looking at 2030 for him to make his run. But he's still planting those seeds, and he's got some support. My feeling was twofold. First, that I'm frustrated with this governor and the job that he's doing, not feeling as though he is doing what I think that somebody should be doing in that role, which is being super focused on the economics of the state and not just the budget document for the state. And what I mean by that is that people who live in these different towns across the state pay a lot of money for their property taxes, and it hits the middle class way harder. And the governor is saying, well, we're doing a really good job at shoring up the state finances, but that ignores what's happening locally. And so we're squeezing and pushing people out. And there's a whole number of other issues that are important to me that the governor either slows down or waters down, and that is why I'm running.
So in many places, such as Maryland, 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote in local elections, like mayoral or Board of Education. Would you support it if this kind of legislation were to come to Connecticut?
I am the introducer of that bill. And we just saw in the last month, the UK, I don't think it was England specifically, I think it was the UK, but that could be wrong. Let's just say England, just made it possible for 16-year-olds to vote. So what I find is that I'm often on the front of issues and leading issues, and when you are there, people often take you less seriously. And then my job is to make the argument about why I think it's a smart thing to do. and then also point to other places around the world where they do this successfully. And so my opinion has been that if we in government, or even as participants in our civic democracy, want people to be engaged, what are the best predictors of that? And that is, the earlier that you vote, the more likely you are going to be a lifelong voter. And the arguments against this have historically been, well, 16-year-olds don't pay taxes. Not true, they pay sales tax, just like anybody else, so they definitely pay taxes. And then the other issue is that you juxtapose it with parents often have a strong influence on their kids. If you actually look at the data, only 40% of kids are going to be voting against their parents, and 60% do. But for some people that are against this, the feeling is that, oh, all kids will be voting with the way that the parents do. I think that takes some autonomy away from 16-year-olds. There's no direct line where all of a sudden you're mature, all of a sudden you are now considered as an adult. We make it 18, but I think in a lot of ways, at least very specifically as pertains to voting, that can be somewhat arbitrary. And when you're looking at making decisions that are not rash and not gut level, and you're being very systematic in terms of why you're making that choice, that 16-year-olds very thoroughly hit that bar. And so when you're 16, you're still in high school, you're still learning, you are around teachers, and you're around people that are trying to teach you how to get involved in democracy. This is a perfect time to say, okay, not only can you register, but look, here in the hallway, you can literally drop your ballot, and then we can go to town hall and make sure that your vote counts. I think that there's a very strong argument for why we would allow 16-year-olds to vote.
So you ran for Secretary of State in 2022. What lesson would you take from that campaign and apply to your gubernatorial campaign?
So much, because this is a Democratic state, so much of success at a statewide level relies on the party and party infrastructure winning line A. And what I mean by that is you want to be the endorsed candidate if you're in a primary. We have had Republican governors, but that was over 20 years ago. I think that the demographics of our state have changed substantially since then. So there are 2,000 people that go to the convention every 4 years, approximately. And these are the people to be winning over. And it takes an incredible amount of effort to be around the state. There's a sense that it's almost harder to run for a statewide position in Connecticut than it is in a place like Texas, because in Texas they don't expect you to be everywhere, but in Connecticut they do, because it's smaller. And so we have 169 towns, and we don't have the same level of density that New York has with New York City, where about 40% of the people in New York live in New York City alone. We are much more spread out among the suburbs. And while we do have density in Stamford, New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, it's not the same as like New York. So you really do have to be in a lot of places. And you have to start early, and you have to plant the seeds of this idea of a larger run years and years and years ahead of time. There are people that I've talked to that Susan has got their commit 8 years ago to run for governor. So it also is an understanding that tenure really matters in politics. And while people are always frustrated in public by the fact that we have older politicians, there's a very specific reason for that. Is that because you've spent decades and decades building these relationships. And over the last 50 years, I was starting to say, is that we've only had one person ever win a statewide position as a line B candidate, as a non-endorsed candidate, and that was actually Susan Meisowitz. So it goes to show that that really matters, which means that you have to be calling people and talking with people and meeting with people, even when you're not running. You have to be doing this years and years and years and years in advance. So the benefit that I have of having run for Secretary of State is I began to build those relationships. And because of that, now I can take some of those relationships, build them out even more, and I'm in a much better jumping place now.
Okay. So if there's one thing you could say to young people who want to get involved in public service, what would it be?
Start with a campaign. This can be something local, like Board of Ed or City Council or Mayor. Any campaign will do. And the need for support is always out there. So you as a young person are always wanted, whether it is to help somebody go out and outdoors, make telephone calls, write letters, input data. There's so much work to do in these campaigns. And that is how you then begin to build those relationships, because ultimately being engaged with politics means being engaged with people. And that is where you are needed. And there's a lot that people don't know. So I'm going to be working on a series to explain what is a Democratic Town Committee? How do you get on a Democratic Town Committee? What do they do? What's that process? And what I find is that for a lot of politics, because people sort of come and go, is that there's this feeling that it's monolithic and there's a lot of control from the top, but really it's a lot of randomness. And so my goal is to just help make politics seem less confusing and a little bit more transparent, and then also try to help people, just as to your question, how do people get involved?
Okay. So Connecticut is famous for its high cost of living, making many families unable to afford a home. What is going on in the General Assembly to help this, and what would you do as governor to help this issue?
So part of the problem is that we aren't building enough, and especially after the pandemic, we have seen property costs skyrocket. And here in Hamden, it's every 5 years, we mandatorily, as a town, have to reevaluate the worth of every home, every property. And so we saw residential go up by 55% on average, and we saw commercial go up by 30%, which means that more of the burden is now on the backs of people that live in Hamden. And we're not seeing new construction here for housing. A little bit here and there, but not enough to actually offset the cost of how much everything's going up. Now, if you were living in a home and you're planning on selling and you can get that equity out, that's a good thing. But if you're living there for decades and you're always paying that percentage on your home, it's an incredible burden. And so one of the things that we need to get better at is incentivizing more building. Because if you have more stock, that is going to decrease housing costs, because people are going to say, well, I'm not going to live in this expensive place, I'm going to live in this more affordable place. And this person is trying to sell this home will say, well, I still want to sell my home, and then they'll bring those costs down. We right now have made it very, very difficult to allow for new housing. And a lot of that is regulation, and we kill things because we say that there's not enough parking, because the house doesn't abide by the decor demeanor of the town, and we allow a lot of this local control to basically stifle housing. And what ends up happening is we often dump our new housing stock into our urban centers, which doesn't end up actually helping the state, because in every town we have people that are working minimum or lower wage jobs, and people who are working these jobs are going to have a hard time getting there. So if we don't have affordable housing in every single town, then we're going to have major problems. And it's these smaller towns, and not necessarily even wealthier towns, but smaller towns that really fight against this. Some of that is because they say that we don't have enough transportation for people. We don't have sewer, so we can't actually be building these larger units, because they can't just rely on well. And to a degree, those arguments are fair. And so that's why it's our job as a state to say, well, we will provide you the resources to build out the infrastructure so that you can allow more of this housing. But you also can't just unfairly burden developers from building because you just don't want affordable housing in your town.
What is one specific issue that you care a lot about? And if you were elected as governor, what would you plan to do to help it?
The most important issue to me, and I've already mentioned this, is the way that we tax people. I think that when folks say that we are overtaxed, it is predominantly because of the property tax. And while the state itself does not levy that tax, it's municipalities that levy that tax. If the state doesn't send money back to municipalities, then towns, which have to pay for education, they have to pay for roads, they have to pay for police, they have to pay for firefighters, they have to pay for public services. If the state isn't sending that money back, then people still have to pay. And so what we've seen over the last decade, 15 years, is that we're paying about 10 to 15% less than we used to. And the need doesn't go away. And because the need doesn't go away, that need to pay then is being taken care of by the towns. So that to me is the biggest issue, is that if we are being honest about trying to build out the middle class, we can't be taxing them significantly more than the wealthy. And I'll finish that point just to say that every couple of years, few years, we put out a study from the state government that shows that the more money you make, the less you pay as a percentage of your income to state and local taxes. So you get ultra wealthy, you're paying half the rate as people that make less. And so the top 4,500 people in our state pay between 7 to 8% of their income, where the bottom 1.2 million people are paying upwards of 20 to 30% of their income. And to me, that is the big problem that we need to fix.
So Ned Lamont is a widely approved governor. He cut down taxes and paid down debt. Can you give me an example of something you would do in office that Ned Lamont didn't accomplish?
Yeah, so what Ned was really doing is writing on the successes that we put into place before he got elected. So in 2017, we passed a budget that really solidified the guardrails, which I have conflicting feelings on. We need to have rules and we need to have boundaries, but the way that those rules and boundaries are put into place need to be done fairly. My feeling is that they're done very unfairly. And so what the governor has done is mostly kept a steady hand in status quo, but the problem is that status quo with bad rules actually hurts a lot of people. And so we have 3 general caps, and if this is boring, just know that my colleagues find it boring too. But we have a revenue cap, we have a spending cap, and we have a volatility cap. The spending cap says you can't spend more than a little bit more every year, and that goes up by household income, it goes up by CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, which is basically, it's very close to what inflation is. The value of a dollar changes every year. And so what ends up happening is with this spending cap, it doesn't increase by the rate of capital gains. And over the past couple decades, people that own property or own stocks make incredible amount of money, but the amount of our spending on the state side doesn't actually track the amount that they're making. We're tracking it to what people are making in the middle class, which has been stagnating for decades. So we spend less and less every year than we have in the past, and then we have caps for revenue. Basically, we say that if we're going to spend $1 million, we need to bring in 1.25% more than that, just because we might be wrong in terms of how much we think we're going to make. And I actually think that cap's okay. And then we have a volatility cap, which basically says we are so reliant on the stock market. So people that invest in Wall Street, and they can have huge highs and they can have crazy lows. If we as a state are so reliant on that money, we need to be a lot more careful, because if we take a whole lot in and we make a whole bunch of promises, the next year's really bad, everybody's really reliant on that money, but we can't give them that money more because we don't have it. And so it comes from a good place, but I think that idea can be encapsulated in the revenue cap just by being smart with your what you're planning. But because the volatility cap was so stringent, we've been putting away about $1.3 to $1.5 billion a year, and we haven't been investing that in people of need. And there's an argument that goes, well, we have so many promises that we made, and we still have $40 billion we need to put away to help with our pension obligations, promises that we made, that we save money because of the fact that we don't have to spend as much for bonding. I know a lot of this is like really high level, but just bear with me because I'm almost done with this question too. So they're right, and it is important to be paying down our pension obligations. But we actually already had that plan laid out in 2017, and any money additional that we put away only brings that back by a year or a couple of years, where people are struggling now and are trying to essentially solve 70 to 80 years worth of financial mismanagement over the course of 30 to 40. And to me, that's not the right way to economically manage our state, because then you're not also investing in people.
Okay, so you've been a strong advocate for progressive issues in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
Which area do you still feel needs the most urgent attention?
It still comes down to the tax system for me in terms of urgent attention. I will say that there are 2 lines of thought. My personal perspective is just change the way that we tax, not necessarily raise more taxes. But there is also the thought that we need better investment in education. that we need better investment in transportation. Just 2 decades ago, you can get to New York City in about a half hour quicker than you can today on the rail line. We have big projects that we're holding off because they cost so much money in terms of transforming our highways and making the quality of life better for people here in Connecticut. So a lot of the things that we want to do would cost money. And we have been in a point of austerity, which basically just means that you are withholding money and you're not investing. And I think that while in the short term that can balance your budget, in the long term, if you're not building out infrastructure for your economy, you're also making it a lot harder for you to grow. And you can't outgrow every problem, and you do need to be smart with your money. But I think right now, there's more investment that we can and should be making, because look at higher education. Instead of investing more, what we're doing is we're just constantly going after it, shrinking it. And we know that our public higher education system is what allows people to enter the middle class, to become educated if their parents hadn't gone to a higher education school before. So we need to be doing more investing, not less investing. And it's possible because we're putting all that additional money aside, but it takes a changing of the conversation.
So what or who inspired you to go into public service?
I started paying attention to politics around 2008, 2009. I mean, my mother was non-political, so I didn't grow up political. And I went to Hamden Hall. And at Ithaca, when I went to college, was when I started paying attention to Bush v. Gore and the hanging Chad and all the attack ads that I thought were really unfair against Democrats. And I started aligning more with the substance of what Democrats often stood for, not always stand for. And I would say Obama was my first political love. But at the same time that he was running, we were also seeing the stock market crash, and we were seeing the Great Recession. And Elizabeth Warren was, before she was elected, the first person that I felt was speaking truth to power and had a full grasp of the economics and a full grasp on what the solutions ought to be. And I paid attention to her for years and years after and today. And then for getting involved locally, it was when Sanders announced he was going to run. I had taken a break from politics for years. His economic policy was the most similar to Elizabeth Warren. So I gravitated to Bernie. But I definitely consider myself an economic populist. I think it's the best economic theory that we have out there. I think building the base is not only morally right, I think it's economically right. And so those three, I would say, have driven my thinking the most.
So what is the General Assembly doing to stop ICE from deporting people in Connecticut, and what would you do as governor to help address this issue?
So the main thing that we can do, because we can't stop them from coming in, is we can limit our communication with them. And we can limit how much our police and correctional officers send them information and give them tips about who they would need to come and pick up. And we can't do that perfectly. People are gonna have their own personal selves and they're gonna do their own thing, but we can try to make sure that this legislation has teeth. It's something that we put into place a while ago, like well over a decade ago. And we make corrective changes, and there were corrective changes that we were making this year. And one of those things was basically not allowing ICE to enter our courtrooms and our courthouses. And the governor didn't want to do that. His perspective was that if you do too much to in some way attack, I would say, let's not say attack the federal government, but incentivize them to come into our state because they will feel that we are contravening against their policies, then we're doing more damage than good. But my feeling is they're already here. And what are we doing to protect people now that they're already here? And these are masked, generally men, who don't identify themselves, who carry around weapons and are incredibly abusive with their practices. And when they kidnap people, we don't know where they go. And we as a state need to be doing significantly more to not only be listening to immigrant communities, but trying to figure out more and more protections to put in place, not less out of fear of the federal government.
So how do you think federal education funding cuts impact the schools in Connecticut? Is there anything you could do as governor to keep these cuts out of Connecticut?
So the cuts are coming. I mean, when the federal government is cutting, they're saying things like you can't have DEI, and sometimes that's like literally the actual letters, and sometimes it's not, and it's all very unclear because what they are doing is they're fighting just this sort of nebulous culture war. This affects people significantly. I mean, every dollar that they don't send to us, we have to pay. That said, with the bill that they passed just within the last few months, the ultra wealthy are getting massive tax breaks. And it so happens that Connecticut is a state with ultra wealthy people in it. And so people that live here are getting those tax breaks. And so the question is, are we going to ask those people who are getting those tax breaks to then send that money to our state government so that we can continue having a fair and just society? And that right now is very much an open question.
So many people are upset about Trump's big, beautiful bill. This includes cuts to Medicaid. Is there anything that this legislature could do to help protect people in Connecticut that rely on Medicaid?
It's fundamentally the same question, is that we need to make sure that we are spending enough to take care of our most vulnerable. And many people don't know that Medicaid is husky, that they are one and the same. It's just our terminology for it. And we had already started working on it earlier this year, recognizing that there was a shortfall going into session, and that was before this federal bill passed. And we did about 5% of what we need to do in terms of overall spending, because Medicaid rates basically did increase for a couple decades. And so doctors are saying, well, it doesn't make sense for me to take care of folk that don't have the funds and are on Medicaid or on Husky, because I can't make the numbers work as a business. And so if we don't reimburse enough, then people who need that support aren't gonna get it. And then what happens is that if you aren't going for routine checkups or checking out that mole or checking out that rash, and it gets worse and worse, and then you go when it's an emergency room visits are significantly more expensive, and the cost of the system gets like so much more expensive, and emergency rooms are never going to turn you away, and disease doesn't care how much money you have. It's going to spread whoever you are. And so one of the most important things we can spend money on is preventative care, and that's what Medicaid would help with, but we spend more money on it.
This is the final question. It's a fun one.
Okay.
We know
I thought these were all fun so far.
We know you absolutely love your two dogs.
I do.
I've seen on your social medias.
Yes.
Tell us one thing about them.
So they are mother and daughter. I raised them both for Guiding Eyes for the Blind. They're numbers 5 and 6 in terms of the dogs that I've raised. Hermione, the older one, had 2 litters, one of 8, one of 7. And so Vega was from the first litter. And Vega, who I also raised, ended up being a service dog in Minnesota. After she served for about 6 or 7 years, I got a text one day about 1.5 years ago asking if I would want her back, because the person who got her didn't want to keep her. And I said yes immediately. So I thought I would actually never see Vega again. And so getting her back was just one of the best things that's happened to me in the last couple of years. They're great dogs.
All right, well, that's the interview. So thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.